The kitchen was peaceful, almost too still, except for the faint clinking of spoons and forks against plates and the steady hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. It was one of those ordinary midweek evenings, the kind that didn't stand out. Nothing awful, nothing wonderful, just a quiet weight of another long day settling into the bones of the house. The clock on the wall ticked softly, its hands pointing to just past 7. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a pale glow through the window. Inside, the air smelled faintly of roasted chicken and steamed carrots, a simple meal that Jake and Michelle had shared dozens of times before. Jake had just walked through the door, his shoulders slouched from hours at the office. He was tired, bone-deep tired, but he still tried to hold on to the familiar rhythm of their nights together. His jacket hung crooked on the hook by the door, and his shoes left a faint trail of dirt across the tile floor. He didn't notice. He never did. Dinner was already waiting on the table, served up on their chipped white plates. Tender baked chicken, a handful of sweet carrots, and a scoop of plain rice. It wasn't a grand feast, nothing to write home about, but it was warm, comforting, like a quiet hug after a noisy day. Michelle had set out earlier, moving through the motions without much thought. She was already there, sitting across from him at the small wooden table. Her hands rested lightly on either side of her plate, her fork untouched. She hadn't said much since he'd gotten home, just a quick hey when he walked in, her voice flat, almost distant. There was a stillness about her tonight, a kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but heavy, like the air before a storm. Jake felt it, even if he couldn't name it. It made the room feel denser, like the walls were pressing in just a little closer than usual. He tried to fill the silence. That's what he always did when things felt off. He talked. He scooped a bite of rice into his mouth and started with something small. "Work was a mess today," he said, his voice casual but strained. "This new project they've got me on, it's like herding cats. Deadlines keep shifting, and no one knows what's going on." He paused, waiting for her to nod or smile, but she didn't. Her eyes stayed on her plate, tracing the edge of a carrot with her fork. Undeterred, he kept going. "Oh, and you remember Tim from accounting?" He spilled coffee all over his desk again. 3rd time this month. Guy's a walking disaster. He forced a chuckle, hoping it might lighten the mood, but it fell flat, echoing weakly in the quiet. He tried again, reaching for something they shared. "Hey, you know that show we used to watch? The one with the detective and the dog? They're rerunning it on Channel 5. Maybe we could catch an episode later." His words hung there, waiting for her to grab onto them, to pull them back into the way things used to be. But they didn't land. Michelle didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't even look up. Each sentence he tossed out seemed to drift away, swallowed by the stillness she carried. Then, out of nowhere, she moved, her head tilted up slowly, her eyes meeting his for the first time that night. Her face didn't shift, no frown, no glare, just a blank calm that made Jake's stomach twist. She set her fork down gently, the metal clinking softly against the plate. When she spoke, her voice was steady, clear, almost too even, like she practiced in her head 100 times. "You will never be enough for me," she said. The words hit like a punch, but there was no anger behind them, no heat. She didn't raise her voice or tighten her jaw. It was as plain as if she were reading the time off the clock. Just a fact, delivered without fuss, like she'd been holding it inside for months, maybe years, and now it was finally free. The room didn't change. The fridge kept humming. The clock kept ticking. But the sound seemed to fade into a dull roar in Jake's ears. He blinked at her, his mind scrambling to catch up. Had he heard her right? He must have. Her eyes, steady and unblinking, confirmed it. This wasn't a joke, not a slip of the tongue. There was no fight in her words, no invitation to argue or explain. Just that single, quiet line, dropped into the middle of their ordinary dinner, like a stone into still water. And somehow, that made it hurt more than if she'd yelled or cried. Jake's mouth opened, then closed. He couldn't find a response, not yet. His gaze dropped to his plate. The chicken sat there, cooling fast, the rice clumped together in a sad little pile. The warmth had drained from the food, and the room felt colder too, like someone had cracked a window he couldn't see. It wasn't just what she'd said that shook him. It was how she'd said it. with such ease, such certainty, no hesitation, no stumble. She'd chosen this moment, this plain, tired Wednesday night, to say something so final. He felt the floor shift beneath him, not literally, but in his chest, in his head. It was like the world tilted, rearranging itself around her words. Something had broken, or maybe something had just been uncovered. Something that had been there all along, waiting for one of them to name it. He glanced around the kitchen, desperate for something familiar to hold on to. The faded yellow curtains still hung above the sink, the same ones they'd picked out at a yard sale 2 summers ago. The fridge door still had that dent from when he'd bumped it with a chair. The coffee pot sat on the counter, half full from this morning. Nothing looked different, but everything felt wrong. Had it always been like this? He wondered. Had the quiet between them been building for longer than he'd realized? He thought back to other nights. Dinners where she'd been distracted, mornings when she'd left without a goodbye. Maybe it hadn't happened overnight. Maybe it had been creeping in, slow and silent, for months. He wanted to ask her why. The question burned in his throat. Why now? Why this? Why him? He wanted to understand what he'd done or hadn't done to make her feel this way. But the words wouldn't come. They stuck there, heavy and useless, while his mind raced. Across from him, Michelle didn't flinch. She didn't look away or soften her gaze. She just picked up her fork again, calm as ever, and took a small bite of chicken. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just cracked his world open. She wasn't waiting for him to react. Wasn't fishing for a fight. She'd said what she needed to say, and that was that. Jake shifted in his chair, the wood creaking under him. His thoughts spun, grasping for something solid to cling to. He tried to tell himself she didn't mean it, that she was just tired or upset. He tried to reason it out. One sentence didn't define him, didn't erase everything he was. He was a good guy, wasn't he? He worked hard, paid the bills, came home every night. But even as he built that defense in his head, her words looped back, sharp and clear. You'll never be enough for me. The sting wouldn't fade. It burrowed deeper, settling into his chest like a weight he couldn't lift. He looked up at her again. Her face was still neutral, her movements slow and deliberate as she ate. Jake didn't know what to say, not because he thought she was wrong, but because he realized arguing wouldn't change a thing. It would be like shouting into the wind, trying to hold on to something that had already slipped away. He set his fork down carefully, the soft clink loud in the quiet. He didn't yell. He didn't demand she explain herself. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his shoulders slumping, and let out a long, shaky breath. Michelle finished her bite, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and stood without a word. She picked up her plate, walked to the sink, and rinsed it under the tap. The water hissed softly, the only sound breaking the stillness. Then she turned and left the room, her footsteps fading down the hall. Jake didn't move. He sat there, alone in the silent kitchen, staring at the half-eaten food on his plate, the untouched glass of water beside it, the empty chair where she'd been. Everything was the same, the table, the plates, the dim light overhead, but nothing felt right anymore. The room was hollow, and so was he. He stayed there for a while, longer than he meant to. The clock ticked on. The fridge hummed, and the night stretched out beyond the window. He didn't know what to do next. Part of him wanted to follow her, to demand answers, to fix whatever this was. But another part, a quieter, heavier part, knew there was nothing left to say. She'd spoken her truth, and it had landed like a final note in a song he hadn't known was ending. Everything was the same, but everything was different.